put this one up. Back to chat. There we go. Alright, and so this should cut soon and go to live soon. Let's see what the delay is. I'm pretty sure as soon as the commercials start to roll, that's when it'll flip over. Oh, I gotta double check my sound setting. Make sure that the microphone is picking up. While the pre-roll is still, that's still there. Slide this back up. Okay. So then that will roll over shortly. Pretty sure that's just going to finish its roll. And then it'll pop over. At least I think. We'll see. Thinking it should. There we go. Yeah, there's like a brief delay. Okay. All right. I can turn that off. Go back here. And now can actually go through and present. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. Slow. There we go. Slow motion. And welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins-Sherwood, also known as Byron of Sidious. And per the title that I've decided to give this stream today, I want to talk a little bit about narrative framing, or your choice of words matters. As anybody who has taken any time trying to create material of the written fictional variety, or even of the non-fictional variety, the words you choose to utilize when conveying your message, when building a scene, when conveying dialogue between characters, even when describing the characters or the environments in which a story is set, in which the framework of the scene is being constructed, the words you choose to utilize as a storyteller are deeply important to the tone that the audience is going to take away. In terms of audiovisual presentation in a television show or a film, the lighting, the soundtrack, the shot blocking are elements that combine together to compose a general tone or aura or a feeling of the sort of environment that you as the audience are stepping into. A fine example would be John Carpenter's 1982 The Thing. You know from the outset of the film, when the pilot is chasing after the Husky in the chopper, that initially what you are looking at is a film that is not a story that is not going to tell you everything you need to know, that there are going to be unanswered questions, that there's going to be an element of what the heck is going on. Because in the very title sequence, you've got an alien craft flying down and crashing into the planet in the title sequence. So you are set up immediately for, there is a mystery here, there's something otherworldly. And then in the first scene sequence after that title shot, you've got a chopper pilot who is trying to chase down and shoot a dog in some kind of frozen tundra wilderness. There is no explanation. There is no dialogue. There is no caption. There's no title card. explaining the sequence of events and what exactly is going on. The framework of the story is set for its audience. The choice of words plays heavily into the environment. I want to take a look at another example, and genre is vital in terms of how you're going to frame your narrative, your story. For instance, let's take a look at a knife, just a simple blade, in the hands of an elite, stealthy assassin sort of character in a real world setting, in a spy thriller story. The knife in the hands of an assassin carries a different connotation as opposed to a blade in the hands of some mask wearing serial killer who preys on the unsuspecting and the weak and vulnerable. The genre of the story is presented to the audience by way of opening scene and sequence, typically, and how that knife plays into the framework of your audience. You, as the reader or viewer, or in the case of video games, as the player, there's a different connotation and a differentiated tone that is established by the presence of this weapon, as opposed to, let's say, take it into a fantasy setting. A character, like a protagonist, whether it be a primary protagonist or a supporting character, drawing a short blade in a fantasy novel sequence. There are several reasons why they could be doing that. Hey, Brookie, how you doing? Good to see you, hon. Thanks for popping in. I for some reason it's not indicating on my program here that there's a viewer on YouTube. Yet you've said hello via YouTube. I'm using Rumble Studio to to broadcast. It's my go-to. I just sign into my Rumble account and go to the Rumble Studio, and I can simulcast onto YouTube. But for some reason, it's not indicating there are any YouTube viewers. But thank you for popping in and for saying hello, so that lets me know that you are here. The blade in a fantasy setting being pulled out by an assistant, a companion protagonist character to your primary character, doesn't convey as much menace or as much danger. Oh, that's good. Good. Thank you for popping in, even though you're at work. I appreciate that. But that blade has a less ferocious or dangerous sentiment attached to it in that fantasy setting. And then if you were to take that same weapon and put it into a horror thriller story, wherein the lunatic, unknown antagonist character draws that blade, it has a much different connotation to it. Even if you have a protagonist pulling out a knife of some sort or a blade in a horror story, that weapon, predicated on the framework of the environmental tone and the expectations set for the audience in the early going of the story, that weapon has a much different presence, as opposed to in, say, a science fiction story, wherein a blade being pulled out by a primary or support protagonist character might just be utilizing a tool that is necessary for the available current task, unless it's something more dark sci-fi or horrific sci-fi, as such as in Alien films, where the protagonist character or support character no longer has a firearm available or a weapon of any kind, and this is their last desperate line of defense. That singular object, that weapon, that knife, has a different connotation dependent on your choice of words and how you frame the story at the outset. The expectations from the audience will determine, by and large, precisely what sort of connotation or meaning can be applied to that blade. There's also the level of detail that the storyteller chooses uh, to ingrain into the weapon in question. In a lot of fantasy novels, particularly the works of Stephen R. Donaldson, the Thomas Covenant novels or the novels of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, most of the supporting protagonist characters, when they draw a weapon, Donaldson spends about 3 or 4 sentences describing every weapon that is drawn, because characters do not draw weapons in his stories for the most part unless they are about to engage in hostilities, unless there's about to be combat. So the description of the weapon in question has a vitality to it. But, and this is what's important and why I enjoy Donaldson as opposed to somebody like Terry Brooks, who I enjoy the Shannara novels. I enjoyed the Shannara series, don't get me wrong. But Donaldson had, throughout the Thomas Covenant novels, a habit of deeply and in painstaking detail describing the weapons drawn or used by primary protagonists and high level supporting protagonists and antagonists once. He would never describe the weapon again unless something significant had happened to the weapon in order to alter its state and its description. Then he would describe the alteration, but that would be it. As opposed to Brooks, who, unfortunately, throughout particularly the second set of Shannara novels, the quadrilogy, had a bad habit of every time a weapon was drawn by especially by Walker Bow, he would describe the weapon in painstaking detail, even if the weapon didn't matter and didn't come into play in the next following scene. It got a little annoying. But the world setting determines a great deal of the context of weapons, wounds, and character personality types. The quiet, stoic detective in a gritty, kind of realistic, almost noir police procedural story is going to read or convey much differently than a quiet town guard or constable in the confines of a fantasy novel, or a security officer in a science fiction setting on a spaceship. The attitude or persona that is expressed clearly and openly to the audience, whether it be a reader, viewer, or player, if it's a video game, the genre does tend to set down some kind of guardrails for your expectations and how to read into these characters, how they're going to be portrayed differently depending upon the genre of the story. Genre as an expectation benchmark is effective and it is timeless. Minor wounds in a fantasy or a sci-fi story are often quickly and easily kind of dismissed or dealt with through the use of healing magic or stim packs, med sprays, or healing spells and potions. There's a different scale of danger and threat depending on, especially if it's a minor wound. It can be brushed off or ignored largely by the audience. They have certain expectations predicated upon the genre of the story that they are partaking of. More often than not, those wounds, because of the framework of the genre expectations, they don't affect much. And even I have been guilty of this kind of minor omission in my own work over the years. I'm not perfect in this regard. I have fucked up, and I've done that before myself. In horror stories, however, or reality based fiction, even minor injuries are often revisited or compounded upon and cause disruption to the protagonist's ongoing and overall struggles, their challenges in the framework of that story. Edward Mullen's novella Scarecrow and the Friday the 13th novel Church of the Divine Psychopath come to mind for me, where your primary protagonist character or secondary protagonist characters receive a glancing gash wound to their, in the case of Mullen's Scarecrow novella. Richard, the primary character in that story, he gets a small gash on his leg, but we revisit this gash throughout the following sequence of the story because it's a wound from a filthy hand scythe, and it's immediately painful. It stings. The wound is somewhat deeper than a shallow, just surface level cut, so it disrupts his movement and his ability to run away from this creature that is stalking him throughout this village and around its outskirts. It has a detrimental and ongoing effect on Richard, on the primary character. And in Church of the Divine Psychopath, one of the kind of paramilitary officers who is trying to contend with Jason Voorhees and the cult at Crystal Lake Camp, he takes a grazing bullet wound to the foot. Now, this is not necessarily a major injury because it was a graze. It didn't go through his foot. But every movement, every couple of sentences or paragraphs, he winces. He limp runs. He hops and hobbles. The word choice for his verbs of movement are predicated upon that minor injury. But because it is a horror story setting, this is no minor inconvenience. It becomes a legitimate, ongoing problem, particularly when he is engaged in a firefight with the members of the cult at Crystal Lake, because he has to move away from and get to cover and concealment, because there's a difference between cover and concealment. I've been growled at plenty of times about this by Brother Cortex. Major difference between concealment and cover. When he's moving from concealment to concealment or to cover, his movement speed and agility is compromised. Not by some giant wound, he's not like missing his foot, but it's enough of a detriment that what would be a minor inconvenience or completely forgotten about in, say, a fantasy setting, in this horror setting, it is deeply concerning, and it causes him to no longer be as effective in how he combats his antagonists. The word choice utilized tells its own, concealed narrative within the framework of the overall narrative of those scenes. Saying that Chavez hobbled from behind the school bus to being up against the side of one of the cabins, that word choice is there. He didn't run, he didn't sprint, he didn't move to, he hobbled from the cover of the bus to the concealment on the side of the cabin. That one word choice, hobbled between. It's only a single word, but your choice of words matters. And that choice of words was predicated upon the framework of expectations of the genre of the work. Readers, viewers, and players of video games often have an expectation based upon the genre of the work when they go in to see how things will scale or operate within the confines or framework of that particular piece of fiction. Here's another fine example that popped into my head this morning when thinking about what I was going to do this show on. Werewolves. Now, depending on your type of werewolf, too, because there's different iterations of werewolves and different interpretations of the mythology and the lore, and how it's applied does make a difference. When you look at books or films like the Howling series, those creatures turned into the hybrid man beast form on any given night. They were not dependent upon the status of the moon and what phase it was in. There are other stories in horror and fantasy that contend with werewolves, however, where they do only change form under the glare of a full moon. That's the traditional mythology. That's the traditional framework of the werewolf creature. Is typically speaking, they only change form under the light of a full moon, as opposed to in the Howling books and in the films, it was any night. As soon as the sun set and the moon rose, regardless of phase, that creature, that individual who looked mostly human throughout the day, turned into this beast. Typically, in the books, the werewolves are described in their bestial form as gigantic, oversized dire wolves that were capable of standing upright and moving bipedally for short distances and for a few moments at a time, as opposed to in the films, they were presented as the full-on, walking upright man-beast hybrids. The man-beast hybrid is also what was shown in the Scottish horror film Dog Soldiers, which, quite frankly, if you're looking for an excellent werewolf film, I recommend Dog Soldiers over any of the Howling movies, especially over the second one. Which, by the way, you want to talk about a movie that was based upon a book. The second Howling film has almost no tie in terms of the actual material of the narrative story to the book from which it was born. The second Howling book was an almost direct sequel, narratively speaking, to the first Howling book. It was a continuation of the story set a few years after the events of the first Howling. The second Howling movie had almost no narrative connection whatsoever to its source material. The same thing happened with another werewolf property, Whitley Strieber's The Wolfen. Now, the Wolfen novel, absolutely fantastic and gut-wrenching. It is a tense story. And when the Wolfen strike in the book, the results are horrific. The way in which they kill is described quickly. Like there's something happens, and Strieber has a really great talent for short, sharp moments of activity, and then really zooming in to show you the details of the aftermath, the effects of what these creatures have done to a human body. And it is gruesome, and it's beautifully told. Now, take those werewolves from horror. Now let's take a look at werewolves in fantasy. In fantasy stories, while werewolves are often described in a way to still make them dangerous and lethal, as, say, depicted by the underworld films, they're not as uncontrolled. They're still savage. They're still powerful, potent creatures of a bestial nature and raw power. But they're less savage, if that makes sense. They're less brutal and heartless and thoughtless in the way in which they engage their prey and or enemies. They're efficient, they are brutes, but it's not as raw as the wolfen creatures, the lycanthrope creatures as portrayed in Strieber's Wolfen. In my own Templarian Tales fantasy novels, werewolves are civilized. At least most of them are. Lycanthropes, generally speaking, throughout the Templarian Tales, are sentient, cognizant, civilized creatures. Many of them have existed throughout the history of Templaria in sort of small tribal packs and tribes, and they have slowly become more and more ingrained and incorporated into the broader overall Templarian society. Most of them spend the majority of their time in their hybrid beast form, whether this be werewolves like Ignatius Stockholm, or Gotrin were-rats like Flint Annenham. They are always in that man-beast form. So there's less obvious threat. The tone of their behavior is not predicated upon the normal mythological or horror story framework settings that are often and typically assigned to them when we initially encounter them in horror fiction. The genre changes the framework of those creatures. Another comparison would be clawed creatures, clawed monsters, let's say, or just creatures. In fantasy, a clawed opponent or monster or animal, when contending with your primary protagonists, if your protagonist or support character is wearing armor of any kind of quality, a simple bestial claw typically isn't going to do a great deal of damage. They're going to be protected by their armor and their own skill set. They're going to take some scratching to their accoutrement or their shield, and then they're going to counter-strike or counter-attack. As opposed to in, say, sci-fi, where you've got like the xenomorphs that have claws, that claw suddenly represents a far greater threat. Because your typical space explorer in sci-fi of the alien variety, they don't have like a Warhammer 40k mech suit of armor. All right? These are not space marines, not of that sort. A claw signifies a much bigger problem for your average space explorer out on an exploratory mission to see if they can recover materials or minerals or do a planetary survey. That dork who's trying to figure out what kind of energy readings they're getting off of that Class M planet, well, guess what? He's got no defense against a claw, as opposed to the city guard in a fantasy story, who is properly equipped by a non-corrupt city council who sends their people to a proper blacksmith to get decent armor and protection. You know, they're going to make sure that they have a gorget or a gorget. I can't remember how. It's a French term. I don't remember if they do the J swooping for that. But a gorget or a gorget, the chain link neck protection that is utilized in order to protect against assassins and cutthroats. A claw is not going to be as big a problem for that city guard based on whatever animal or beast roams into the village. They've got a better chance against that creature than your energy scientist or research scientist does on a spaceship against whatever unholy abomination has smuggled itself aboard their vessel. Genre expectations frame these things differently. So the choice of words that your storyteller will utilize often is initially set up by the style of story they're going to tell. The genre determines a great deal of this, the tone that they're going to utilize. It's also why, however, as a storyteller, you can sometimes throw a real curveball at your audience, whether it be a reader or a viewer or a player. If you shift up the expectation, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. I'm going to hit the bathroom first. Okay. Sorry about that. But for those of you who are video game players and are familiar with memes or webcomics, you'll know the example I'm about to utilize. There was a few years back a fairly popular, like 3-panel meme webcomic. I don't remember. I think I first saw it on Facebook. And it was in the first panel, it's Link from the Legend of Zelda video game series. And he's like, okay, I'm back in Hyrule. What's my first challenge? And the second panel, he looks over and he sees a skeleton with a shield and a sword. And he goes, ah, okay, a skeleton. I know what to do here. And he approaches the skeleton in the next frame. And in the last frame, the skeleton has him impaled on its own sword. And the skeleton says, welcome to Dark Souls, bitch. It's a sudden, unexpected change of your challenges the expectations. Now, over the course of the last, I'd say 10 years, a lot of modern movie makers and screenwriters and authors and video game developers and designers and programmers have been trying to make hay out of this notion of subverting your expectations. Well, guess what? Sometimes that works, but only if you're good at what you're doing. Take, for instance, the folks at Lucas or at Disney with Disney Star Wars. We're going to subvert the audience's expectations. If you can do it well, and if you're talented at such a thing as a storyteller, kudos to you, and let's hold our judgment and see what the end product is. Oh, this is shit. Our expectations were certainly subverted, but the end result was garbage. And it absolutely assassinated the characters of a long-standing, long-running, and much beloved franchise. It took the source mythology and wiped its ass with it. That was not an effective subversion of the audience's expectations. And it wasn't an actual subversion of their expectations. It was a layered insult and a declaration of, we own this now, and you don't get what you want. You will take the slop we're serving you, couched in this material that we know you so love. And that's how they got people's asses in the seats to begin with, playing and preying upon their deep love and long-standing fandom of that source property. You can subvert an audience expectations properly through small moments of narrative technique, not through plot, not through lore. You can subvert through plot. But again, you have to carry it off expertly, or no one will forgive you for the end product. It is of deep importance that you, as a storyteller, understand that not everyone in the audience is going to be happy with your trickery, with your fuckery. They're not going to appreciate it. In horror, you see this all the time. It's called the jump scare. But that's become such a trope of the genre that the audience kind of expects it. It's become an expectation. It's become a trope because we have come to recognize that as a standard narrative technique, a trope. And there's a reason why it's deployed so frequently. Because the audience enjoys them. Because it is something that doesn't completely break the flow of the story. It's a little gasp moment. And everyone's okay with that. In part because it is one of the facets of horror. It causes a brief moment of panic and fear. That is the typical emotional response you're trying to get out of a horror story. You want to make your audience uncomfortable. Greetings and salutations, Murdoch. Yes. Sarge, I did see you followed the channel. I got that notification this morning when I popped open my phone. Good to see you here. Thanks for stopping in. And speaking of dear Sarge, here's the receipt. I did send the books today, Sarge. If you're here, if you're not, if you're watching later, I sent you a picture of this via text when I got done at the post office this morning. I am a man of my word. I said I would get this done. I kept delaying. I kept procrastinating on it and fucking around and dicking around and not getting it done. Well, no more. I got it done. The books are on their way. I apologize again to Sarge for the delay. But I owed it to him to finally get this done. So that is squared up. Hold up a second here. Getting a notification from Substack, which I grumbled a little bit about yesterday. Motherfucker.
Interesting, Nick. Yeah. So, but with Crown of Blood, we have Dweeb and we have, what's his name? Patrick. That's right. I blanked there. Patrick and Dweeb follow a bit of a MacBuffin path, although Patrick goes on to do the right thing, although he plunges from victory to defeat. Dweeb just goes insane and ends up in a very... I will admit, we kind of did that one heavy-handedly, where, like, he doesn't die by any mortals, but dies to elves. It was a little too heavy-handed and on the nose, I think.
Yeah, Brothers Kryn are currently streaming on their Substack, so I'm gonna unfortunately miss that. I'll catch it back. I'll catch it later on the playback. Brothers Kryn, a couple of gentlemen on Substack who I talk to frequently, and we are trying to arrange for me to be on his podcast next week so that we can do an interview show, chit chat that we've been intending to get together and get this squared up and do this this conversation We just keep missing each other on timing. But I'm trying to get that framed up so that we can get that done. Now, another element of genre being responsible for your framing when it comes to character personalities. And this is something that's a little bit more nuanced. Um, the genre of your story is going to be a less of a component in figuring out the primary protagonist's personality type. Most of the time, when a storyteller sets down to create a narrative, to create a story, they already have an idea in mind of the initial character traits of their main protagonist. They already have a kind of a sensation in mind of what kind of guy or gal this is. If they are quiet and shy, if they're brash and loud, if they are introspective and thoughtful. There's some primary archetype character traits that go into the initial composition of your primary protagonist. The framework of the genre is less important when deciding the personality type of your character, with one exception, and that is if the personality trait of your primary protagonist is absolutely dependent upon the framing of the genre of your story. For instance, a primary protagonist who centers their entire approach to life based upon their status as, say, a commanding officer in a fantasy style army. If their entire set of character traits and reactions and thought process is predicated upon living that life, then that is going to play heavily into their personality. But there are going to be elements of their persona and their ego that don't have anything to do with their job or their role. For instance, a primary protagonist character who has a distaste or disdain for being around children. If they find kids annoying or they have no interest in being around kids because they are a soldier, the presence or sight of children makes them think, oh, fuck, I cannot unleash if there's a threat that comes toward me or my unit because I got to defend these kids. So they don't want them around. It's not necessarily predicated on the fact that they don't like kids. It's that maybe they don't like kids being in danger. Likewise, you could have a character who is in fantasy, if they don't like magic or magic users, if they're superstitious, or if their faith in that particular framework of fantasy setting makes them believe that all magic is the work of demons or dark gods or evil spirits, they're not going to be happy about being assigned a mage to their unit. Their background or history, their personal history, is going to have more to do with that than the framework of it being a fantasy genre story. Because in a fantasy genre story, in a fantasy world, if your character knows about the presence and use of magic, then they're already set up with that. You expect them to know about magic in that world. But something personally occurred in their character history to cause them to be about magic or magic users. So a mage being assigned to their unit, that's going to clash with their character background. It's going to clash with that character trait. Now, how they respond to it, that's completely up to the storyteller. If they're going to learn and grow and become accepting, or if they're going to constantly be like, get the fuck away from me. You know, like the Templars towards the mages in the Dragon Age property. Templars in the Dragon Age games They view mages with deep, abiding suspicion because the framework of how magic works in the Dragon Age games, in that mythology, is that mages are accessing powers and energies from a realm of existence known as the Fade. And oftentimes, accessing that energy, that magical power, leaves those wizards, those mages, vulnerable to demonic possession or influence. So the Templars have historical examples for why they should not trust these mages. Because the very use of magic puts everybody around them at risk. So there is a paranoia there, but it's not without good cause. So a Templar being like, a mage, get the fuck away from me, makes sense. But again, it's all predicated on the world building aspects, not necessarily the genre itself, because then you have other worlds in fantasy as a genre where magic is so commonplace that nobody bats an eye. It's different based upon the exact mechanics of the world building of the storyteller in question. So your word choice matters. How you frame the mechanics of how these things work or operate in your particular world building fiction is going to have an effect. Likewise, in horror, because magic does play a part in horror sometimes. You have, I think it was the fourth or fifth Friday the 13th, or Nightmare on Elm Street film, where one of the last girls, she got a hold of Freddy's clawed glove, and she was able to deeply wound him and injure him with his own weapon because it came from or was a component of his essence and part of the dreamscape that he is a primary resident of. It caused greater damage to him than would any normal mortal human weapon because it's from his world. It's a component of who and what he is. So that there is a magic to his glove that would not operate similarly in a different genre framework. I'm getting a little on the margins there with that one. That one's not as good a tie, and I apologize for that, but you get what I hope that I'm coming across clearly at least, and conveying the necessary idea. But anywho, what have we got here? Bob the Free Radical. Okay. That's odd. But alright. Not gonna. Sorry folks, just a message request on Substack. And I realize that's like the third or fourth time I've mentioned Substack. I mention it a lot because I'm on there frequently. It is my primary platform of choice because it is a gathering place for writers, for authors, for journalists, for people who indulge primarily in the written word and in audio as well. Some video because they do the whole live streaming thing. Doesn't work very well for my liking. It's only available right now through the app on your phone, which I'm not a huge fan of. I've only got a couple people here right now, but at this juncture, if either of you who are still watching, if any of you who are still watching, have any questions for me at this point, by all means, let fly. That one didn't come out very good. Whoops. All right, so I went through this. Okay. Nope. Done. Taking a moment just to kind of parse through my thoughts here and try to figure out where to go from here. Because really, marketing. Murdoch asks, how do you handle the marketing part? Whoa! Whoa! What the hell happened there? There we go. I accidentally clicked on your username and it opened up another tab to your profile page. I'm like, whoa, what the hell did I do? Sorry about that. How do you handle the marketing part of your book? Um, Tell the truth and shame the devil. I don't handle it very well. I'm not good at promoting my own material. I kind of suck at it, and I always have. Since I started doing this back in 2007, my first commercially published book was Damnation of the Realm, Freedom of the Fire, Volume 1, the very first Fifth Age Templarian tale fantasy novel. Um, I've never been good at marketing or promoting myself. By and large, I rely on the kind of tried and true. When I've got something new available, I'll spend a couple of days kind of spamming the hell out of it on my various socials. Um, but then I kind of quietly I'll bring it up every now and again. I'll mention it to friends and connections on Discord or on Facebook or X. Although I'm not really great about that. Um, I'm not a great professional when it comes to that sort of thing, Murdoch. And were I you, I would not turn to me for advice on the business end of being a storyteller because I suck at it. I'm willing to admit that. However, there are a lot of folks on Substack who discuss marketing and advertising and self promotion quite in depth. And there are a number of them who are, their primary focus seems to be talking about marketing, talking about how to get yourself out there. Um, Cross promotion is one thing that comes to mind. Part of the reason why I'm trying to arrange and schedule this sit down conversation with the brothers Kryn on Substack is in part because they have a rather sizable following on Substack. They've got 2,000 subscribers as opposed to my 232. So they're a much larger presence on there. And of those 2,000 subscribers, almost half of them are paid subscribers to their channel or to their profile. So there are a lot of folks who they are willing enough to support what the brothers Kryn do that they're willing to pay us a monthly subscription. Now that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a paid subscriber on my Substack. Everything I have there is free to read, free to view. Um, but they have had some measure of success when it comes to self promotion and marketing. So talking to folks like the brothers Kryn or other mid-sized published self-published authors can sometimes have some great pointers about how best to promote and market your own material. Cross promotion with other authors is one methodology. Having a YouTube channel or a Rumble channel on which you can do some quick cut kind of sneak peeks or read alouds of short passages or maybe a chapter or two of your own work. That's another methodology of how do you self promote and market when you're on a budget or you have no budget. Like, I don't have a marketing budget of any sort, but I freely offer up snippets of various works that I've done over the years. Some of my older material I've been just republishing via my Substack free of charge for people to read because the material is older. It's been out there for a while. I'm no longer worried about losing a sale on those books because if someone was going to buy them, either they A, already would have, or B, and this is where it comes into a different matter of what is your aim as a storyteller? Are you trying to make a living off of what you're doing? Because I'm not the right guy to ask about that because I suck at it. And I'll preface everything by saying that. When it comes to trying to make a living off of what I'm doing here as a storyteller, I'm not great. I'm just a guy who enjoys telling stories. And if I can make some cash on the side doing it, great. If I can't, oh well. My primary duty is to be a father. My secondary duty is to be a husband. The best I can be at both of those. My third duty from God is to be a storyteller. But there's no guarantee or promise that I'll make a living off of it. That was never guaranteed. That was never promised to me. There is no promise of that sort. Part of my not making a living off of it is self sabotage because I have that perspective, because I approach storytelling as just a passion. Buy my book. Buy my book. Yeah, Lucian knows the screed now at this point. Lucian, greetings and salutations. Thanks for popping in, brother. How do you do? Good to see you. Um, so Murdoch, I apologize for not being able to give you a better, more professional answer to your question. That's on me, and I'm sorry about that. My advice to you, however, don't go to Google and ask about how do I market my book or how do I advertise my material. Don't don't search on Google because you're going to get slammed with all kinds of sponsored and ad supported links and services that are going to charge you an arm and a leg and are never going to guarantee you any results. You do have to be willing to take a certain amount of chance on yourself and invest in marketing and advertising if you've got the money. If you don't, then you're going to be relying heavily on using social media of various sorts to try and self promote. That was my dryer. Sorry about that. Yes, my home office is in the basement of the house. Um, Basement dwelling streamer. Well, I don't dwell down here. I just do my show down here. And sometimes I come down here to write. Usually I take the laptop upstairs, though, to the kitchen area. No worry, Murdoch says, no worries. I just self published my first book and I suck at the marketing part as well. I'm just happy that I came up with a story and happy it got published. Well, yeah, and you know, that's something that maybe I could spend an entire show or video at length talking about is the question of what is your motivation as a storyteller? What's your primary drive? Are you trying to make a living as an artistic person? Kudos. Awesome. Are you relying on that to be a motivation for creating the art? Less kudos. That's where we start drifting into mercenary territory. And by the way, I throw the term mercenary around regarding agents and editors sometimes, but it's not universal. That's not a blanket term to be thrown at everybody who is a freelance editor or a freelance marketing rep. They're not all mercenaries. Some of them do believe in the quality of the product they're trying to represent or edit. Some of them do. It's not fair to the entire field of literary editors or literary agents or literary marketers to assume they're all just bloodless, careless, heartless mercenaries, because they're not. Some of them do give a shit about the quality of the material and the art of the written word. Even in video games, there are people involved in marketing and advertising and distribution who actually care about the quality of the product that they are attempting to foist. And I know that term, again, your choice of words matters here. So maybe not foist or inflict, but who are trying to share this artistic product. Not all of them are bloodless mercenaries. Some of them actually give a shit. Some of them genuinely are invested in making sure that a great game gets in the hands of gamers. There's not a lot of them, though, and they're very hard to pin down. Lucian says, as a possibly pertinent aside, a day or so ago, an artist was fishing around offering commissions over Discord. While I had nothing needed, still, it is one way to try getting the word out. That is true. That's another possibility, is networking with other artists. Murdoch says, I'm a commercial truck driver, and I think about these stories while I'm driving, and then when I get to my delivery store, I write them down. That's pretty cool, Murdoch. Class B short job truck or short truck, or are you a Class A over the road driver? And if Class B, do you have your passenger endorsement, or are you just um, delivery? And I know short job usually indicates that you go to the yard, you pick up your truck, you do the pre-trip inspection, you head out on the road, and you're done within like 8 to 10 hours. You drop the truck back off at the yard, and then you head home. But a lot of what are supposed to be short job truck runs or services end up being, damned close to being over the road. So there is a difference. The only reason I know the differentiation, Murdoch, is because about 8 or 9 years ago, closer to 10 years ago, I worked for a couple of years as a truck driver for Shred and Go, which is a a document destruction company here, based here out of Minnesota. I was a Class B driver for a couple of years. I had to do the whole pre-trip inspection, check on the air brake, make sure that the def was topped up. It can be a little bit of a hassle, especially when you're working with an older truck that the owner of the company just does not want to get fixed because he's a fucking cheapskate. Sorry about that. I realize that I'm skirting the line with what I'm allowed to say there legally, but not a great company. Okay, Class A. I was over the road, but I got a job at a local grocery store, and I have a sleeper truck. Okay, so you've got the sleeper cabin. That's good. That's good. It's a nice setup if you got a sleeper in there. I never went for Class A because I didn't want to do over the road because I had young kids. I'll check that out shortly. But it's good that you got a more local job because over the road is brutal. But those guys and gals, I know there are some female truck drivers for Class A. Those folks are the backbone of our country, the backbone of our system, and they get shit on a lot. Woo! Okay, that's seen some time on the road. Jesus, my goodness. But and this is another thing that kills me about a lot of people who um Lucien says, I failed my test as I had a bit of a panic attack when a taxi decided to cut in front of me. You know, taxi drivers have zero awareness of or appreciation for just how much metal weight is bearing down on them when they do shit like that. It was one of the things I hated about when I would have a run that was downtown Minneapolis. I fucking hated that run. I hated that route. It was every other Tuesday and every other Thursday. I had to do the downtown Minneapolis run, and I fucking hated it because the people who are driving downtown have no fucking clue of the etiquette of the road. If you are in a Honda Civic with a fiberglass frame and a body that's made of barely what can be classified as metal, supposedly, you don't cut in front of a 28,000-pound vehicle bearing down the road at 35 miles an hour. You're gonna get crushed. Or I have to slam on the fucking brakes and pray to a merciful God that I don't end up with a body count at the end of the day. Sorry. Motorists in downtown Minneapolis suck. Anyway, I feel your pain, Lucien. Sorry about that outburst. Actually, why am I apologizing for that? You guys have seen me fly off the handle before, most of you. I have a tendency to do that now and again. I'm only human. Mostly. I'll be right back. Gotta hit the loo, and I'll be back in a minute. Alrighty. Murdoch says, I feel the same way. They put a cattle guard on the front of my truck, and with all the metal in front of me, people think twice before cutting me off. I would certainly and sure as shit hope so. Otherwise, that's just a fucking death wish. Sorry about texting. Just a message from Sarge. I had sent him a picture I took of the receipt from the post office. I kind of lucked out. Um, the supervisor at my local post office, you know, he's a guy. His name is Kyle. He comes into the casino that I work at relatively frequently. Um, so I recognize him. He recognized me when I walked into the post office, and he's like, "Oh hey, how you doing, Josh?" I'm like, "All right." I gotta and I had my daughter with me, so set her down so she could wander around a little bit because thankfully my local post office is the front enclosure is relatively small, relatively contained. So I was just gonna let her roam around a little bit. She had her shoes on. She's finally gotten accustomed to keeping her shoes on. For the most part, she's not quite two. So one of her favorite things to do when she's in her car seat in the back of the van is to reach down and pry the shoes right off of her little feet. But she was running around, kind of circling around in the vestibule there, while I got the label filled out on the box. And when I got to the counter, I saw Kyle recognized me. He's like, "Hey man, how you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm all right, Kyle. Just gotta send out some books." He's like, "Okay, standard shipping, but you know what? Let's go ahead." And he hit a few buttons on his console. I was like, "There we go." I'm like, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, I'm giving you the media mail rate because you're just sending some." You said books. I'm like, "Yeah, sending some books to somebody who they wanted these books. They placed an order for them, and they came to me, and I just wanted to send them along now to who they're supposed to get to." He's like, "All right, yeah, books, man. Yeah, bucket. We'll do a media mail rate for you. So it'll take a couple days longer to get where it's going, but the lower rate, you got your kid here with you. I imagine you're trying to save some money." I'm like, "Yes, thank you." So he gave me the lower rate. So shipping wasn't bad on this. Um, Lucian, oh, you were asking Lucian if he tried the CDL test again. Oh, okay, okay. So that was when you were in the military, you were trying to do the CDL licensing and training. Oh yeah, cool beans. All right, cool beans. Sarge says he'll be joining us here in a minute. So that's peculiar. There's connections, there's draws between people that seem to all sync up. Um, Lucian, you and Sarge were both in the military. Murdoch, I have never been a Class A commercial driver, but I was a Class B driver. So you and I have that connected, shared experience. Obviously, Murdoch, you are an independent small press author, as myself. So there are definitely connections here that draw people together, and it's something that I think has been fascinating about my experience thus far on Rumble. Is I met up and connected with you guys because of Sarge. And I got connected to Sarge. I became interested in Sarge because of a gentleman by the name of. Uh, uh, oh wait, no. He actually no. Sarge introduced me to the Gray Matters. I'm trying to remember how I came upon Sarge. I think he may have commented on one of my videos back when I was on BitChute routinely. Dear Sarge, greetings and salutations. Thanks for dropping in, brother. Good to see you, man. Sorry that prodding you or poking you. You didn't have to drop in. If you're still tired, you could have told me, dude, just not right now. Leave me be. I know morning time is a hard time for those of us who are members of the Society of Sick Fucks. Morning time is caffeine time. Hence why I'm drinking this shit. But hey, it is Mega Man themed, so Blue Bomber. Love Mega Man. There is an area when it comes to word choice that I know it would be easy to lapse into talking about it. And I've been trying to kind of avoid it, but um well, thank you, Murdoch. I appreciate the compliment on that. Um, there's an element of word choice that plays into our everyday experiences as members of the public who are consuming media, particularly traditional institutional media. I'm not usually one to delve into matters political because that's not my forte. That's not my milieu. That's not my bailiwick. But the words you choose to use, and I see this a lot on Substack, your word choice matters when you are trying to convey information. And narrative framing is heavily used and implemented by various outlets of media. The way in which a story is framed tends to tell you a lot about how much you can trust the reporter or the outlet that they work for when you get down to the brass tacks of the facts of a story. Because it gives you an idea of their ideological framework and perspective. The most recent example that comes to mind for me is one that has been banged on quite a bit the last week. Talking about this gentleman who was deported to El Salvador, member of, oh God, Lucy, don't even get me started with fucking Kathy Newman. That's a whole other rage on its own. And maybe I'd be better off going in that direction. I don't know. Kathy Newman is a monster of inference. And part of what makes Kathy Newman such a numbskull cunt, and I'm not fond of just throwing that word out there, what makes her such a numbskull cunt is that she has forgotten entirely the hierarchy of the framework of conversational clarification. There is a hierarchy to these things. Hierarchies occur in nature just as much as they occur in our language. Language is part of communication. Communication is part of our framework of operation and behavior. Our behavior as human beings is a part of nature. And she's completely ignored this. I'm sorry. Lucian, you've sent me down a spur, and I'm going to go down this path. I have to. Kathy Newman, whenever she is interviewing somebody, and she's not the only one who does it, but she is quite frankly the worst fucking offender in recent history for doing this shit. She will interrupt, or she'll wait until the person she's interviewing is done speaking, and then she'll open up and say, so what you're saying is, and Taylor Lorenz is another one who's absolutely guilty to the furthest fucking black wall of doing this shit, of doing the so you're saying trickery and fuckery. This is Hegelian dialectic linguistic combat tactics of the cheapest order, and it needs to be flushed out, shown under the light for what it is. It is fuckery and chicanery of the highest order. It is the technique or the tactic of taking what someone actually said and live in the moment, throwing it through a filter of interpretation or inference, very scant inference, I might add, relying almost entirely on interpretation of what they're saying from her worldview and her biases and her expectations, and not presenting to her audience at all that she is rearranging the word choices and trying to paint the actual message coming from her interviewee into a different light to subvert what they're actually saying and to distort and twist the messaging or the framework of what they're actually trying to say. I hate this. It is the cheapest fucking tactic utilized by journalists of her ilk. They all need to be thrown into the fucking wall, have their head bounced off of it a couple times, and told, don't do this shit. Oh, it's good that you got it fixed, Murdoch, because you don't want to be stranded out there. I'm sorry for yelling, but it is annoying at the highest level. Taylor Lorenz is another one who does this shit, and she needs to be slapped around and corrected for this verbally as well. I'm not recommending anybody actually harm the woman. I'm saying slap her around verbally. Let her know that this chicanery can be observed by people with more than 5 brain cells to rub together. I'm an idiot, and I can see what she does every time from a mile away. Kathy Newman became a zenith point for this shit because of her interview with Jordan Peterson, who, rather than aggressively and angrily or combatively pointing out what she's doing, what she was doing during that interview, rather than throwing it in her face and saying, knock it the fuck off, he just continued to offer clarification. Clarification is the highest point on the hierarchy of message conveyance. It goes interpretation, inference, clarification. You cannot do better than clarification. Kathy Newman and Taylor Lorenz, they receive the answers to their questions and they twist and reinterpret and then lob back out a supposition in the form of a question by rearranging what their interview subject has said in an effort to subvert what their actual message is with their own perceived bias and filter. I can see it happening, and I'm a dipshit. Do you really think everybody is as dumb as that? No. If I can see it, you better believe that a ton of other people notice what you're doing, Kathy and Tay-Tay. You're morons, and you deserve to be called to the mat for it. God, it's frustrating. And again, this is where your choice of words matters. Because for those of us who have some capacity for reading comprehension, and by reading comprehension, I am including hearing and comprehending what is being said audibly, you can apply the tools and skills of reading comprehension to conversational comprehension as well. It's a little trickier because you're having to do it in live time as you're having the conversation with the person or when you're engaging and listening to it live. Going back and being able to replay it is very helpful. Unfortunately, if you are someone like myself who's not always quick on his feet in responding to people like this, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage, as I often am myself. I'm not the sharpest, immediate kickback person. I tend to try to observe for a little bit and go, wait a minute, something's not quite right here. So my comprehension skills in terms of live dialogue and conversation is a little less poignant than it is for the written word. And that's because I communicate best in the written word. So my capacity and willingness to go through the work of reading and rereading and recontextualizing and trying to figure out what exactly is being said and look for, search for inference or search for clarification, that's a little bit more in my favor when the message or material is being conveyed in the written format. I'm much more comfortable there. I've got a little bit more time and space to work with. Live in person during interactive dialogue in a conversation, that takes a great deal of skill. And this is part of what I think a lot of folks um, overlook when they are talking about somebody like Jordan Peterson, when they're talking about somebody like Joe Rogan, when they're talking about somebody like Matt Taibbi. Matt Taibbi is a beast. Um, I'm sorry, Lucian. I know it was intended as a joke, and I'm not mad at you. Never take it to never think that I'm mad at you for bringing these things up. I appreciate that you do, and I know you're probably not trying to set me off, but sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's helpful for me to set me off because then I don't feel like I'm dragging the show or having a ton of dead air because that tends to be unentertaining. It doesn't get people what they want out of a show. Um, oh yeah, yeah, yes. If you're talking about where I'm from, Murdoch, that question. Yeah, I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, but I've been up here in Minnesota now for coming up on 13 years. So I guess I too am in the Midwest, but I'm in kind of the south of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Um, but Lucian, I know that you're not trying to piss me off. You always intend these things beneficently. I know you're just trying to point something out. Never take it that I'm angry at you. I'm not. If anyone is the source target of my rage when it comes to that sort of thing, it's these journalists or would be self proclaimed journalists who engage dishonestly in conversational jujitsu. It's all a tactic for them, it's all a work, an attempt to get one over on their ideological opponents. Now, look, maybe one or two of them will have a legitimate point to make. And I might be more willing to hear them out if they didn't have such a long track record of attempted chicanery. When you spend years of your career mischaracterizing every story that comes across your desk, I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt at a certain point. I'm going to assume that you're acting or speaking in bad faith. Pop-up pirate game at this point. Yeah, well. Yeah, he's trying to make it pop up. Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. It's kind of like that pirate, what is it, Styx, Hex, and Hammer. Which puts me in mind of one of the shorts that I did on YouTube a little while back, talking about the quartering having Styx, Hex, and Hammer on his payroll. It's like I made the quick message. You best start believing in retards, Jeremy. You're employing one. By the way, how great is it that we've reclaimed that word, retard? I know that I would probably get whacked over the head with a hammer on YouTube if anyone was watching over there. But, tax pimp. Oh, yes, tax season. A lot of people are unhappy this time of year because tax season. My wife and I, we take care of that shit as soon as we get the W-2s. In February, we file early. We get it the hell out of the way. Most years we get a return. We get a small return. This year, we did pretty decent. paid off the 2 credit cards that still had a balance on them. So we're paid up, we're done. And by done, I don't mean like we didn't cut up or get rid of the credit cards. We still have them. We just don't really use them all that much. Like we'll use them for a little purchase here or there, and then a month later we'll pay it off, just so that we have those payments, those charges and payments on our credit histories, so that it continues to accumulate a credit history. But otherwise, we don't really rely on them. But it is important to both of us that we use them occasionally, so that they don't just close the fucking accounts. Because credit card companies, sometimes they do that. If you don't use the card, if it carries a zero balance for too long, they'll just say, okay, we're going to shut down the account because we're not making any money on interest from this. Simple thing to do. I tend to, or what I've been doing the last couple months, when I go up to Story Arc and I buy my comics, I'll use my credit card to make the purchase. And then I make the payment the next month. There's a little interest that carries over. Cortex, brother Cortex, greetings and salutations, brother. How do you do, brother? How is the rip and tear at the gym going, brother? Got sidetracked with other shit and only made 1 of 4 quarterly payments. That can sting. It is good to see you here, Cortex. No, I know. I figured you were starting your routine at the gym and that you wanted to start getting some work in there and start getting some results and getting into better shape. I didn't want to disrupt. I didn't want to interrupt your flow there with your new routine incorporating the gym. So I know that we haven't really sat down to talk over a deep dive subject of any sort recently. All right, Murdoch, thanks for popping in and for spending some time here with us here in the corner. It is good that you stopped in. It was good to meet you and chit chat with you for a little bit. And I'm glad that you took away something beneficial and constructive from the program today. So thanks for popping in, Murdoch, and hopefully we'll see you again down the line. Scuba! Greetings, dear. How do you do? I know, Cortex. I'm sorry about that, brother. I've been largely withdrawn off of Discord, except for Lucian says hello, Cortex. He's over on the Rumble end of things. I've been pulling away from most of my Discord channels and contacts, just to kind of try and focus on shit that I've got to do around the house. And I've been doing a couple of these shows just talking about bookish things, being a little bit more on the literary chatter. Although I gotta be honest, yesterday was more of a spur out. Okay, brother. Well, I know that you're like you were trying to get into your routine, and again, I didn't want to disrupt. I've also, and I'll admit, I'll confess, I've enjoyed coming on and doing bookish chat, but I do miss having a deep dive. But we do need to talk over. We need to figure out what our next deep dive is gonna be. Well, yeah, I didn't set my status to away or not available or do not disturb on Discord, brother. I just haven't been too active on there. Hold up, I'm going to highlight that. Dear Sarge says, Josh, yesterday Belgian Dan came around to Rumble. Tell Cortex this is where all the cool kids hang out. Belgian Dan, actually, Sarge, already had a Rumble account, but he so infrequently uses it that he hadn't really remembered to log into it in order to pop onto the show. So that was more a matter of he's just got to remind himself, hey, when Josh is on, it's usually when Byron's on, it's usually through Rumble first. Dude, that's a good amount of time, brother. Hitting the gym for an hour a day. That's way better than anything I got going on for that. Hey, no. Hey. He's not telling you you're not one of the cool kids, Lucian. He's saying, hey, yeah. No, not a problem, Cortex. I know that Rumble is not it's not everyone's cup of tea. And there's a lot of folks who are still hesitant to make the change to a different platform. And part of that has to do with the longevity and the lifespan of YouTube versus Rumble. And there are a number of elements and functions that still aren't working really up to snuff on Rumble as opposed to YouTube. YouTube still has a lot of the framework and a lot of the infrastructure in place and play tested and quality tested and has withstood the test of time on YouTube that Rumble is still struggling with and trying to get up to speed with. I will say, however, Scuba says, I deleted my account. I'm too old to Rumble. Talking about the let's get ready to rumble in the blue corner, weighing 222 pounds. Well, I'm actually only 202 pounds now. Just because I haven't been eating as much. It's not because of any dieting or exercising. I've dropped a bunch of weight the last couple months just because of piss poor diet and not eating. Yeah, doing the Brian Buffer thing there, Brother Cortex. In the blue corner, hailing from parts unknown, the host with the most. Anyway, doing that whole, celebrity deathmatch thing. Lucien says, no, I'm saying I'm not a cool kid. I'm a tech geek and will die that way. Viva la gamer! Hey, no problems there. Lucien, you know as well as I do that you, myself, and Brother Cortex, all of us are gamers of different varying degrees. I'm not nearly as much of a gamer as Brother Cortex. He's always up to date on the latest games, what's going on in the industry, what's fun to play, what's enjoyable. He's got a particular fondness for and familiarity with first-person shooters. If you have a question about a shooter game, Brother Cortex is the guy to ask. If you've got a question about a horror game, he's the guy to ask. He has shown me some beautiful looking games that I wish my computer had the power to run on Steam. Although I gotta say, I've been looking at a couple of visual novel games on Steam, and if only I had the budget. Dear Sarge says, geeks are cool. My shit breaks, and I need guys like you to pimp my shit. You have way more redeeming qualities than jocks. Perhaps true, but we're going to need those jocks when the bugmen inevitably try to come and take all of our shit to redistribute to the masses. I'm going to want a jock with a fucking harpoon ready to shoot these land whales off my front fucking yard. For the Cortex, trying to achieve my Astartes build. Very cool. Yes, because for the Emperor! Lucien says, I'm Scottish, I'm a jock by default. Hey, the caber toss is not a part of your history for no good reason. I'm fairly certain Paul Bunyan, in American mythology and folklore, probably had a little bit of Scots in his background. After all, why else wear the black and red chambray shirt? Anywho, Pretty sure every lumberjack has a little bit of Scots in their background. Cortex says I'll become a cyber jock. There you go. Just, be careful how much cyberization you get in there. Yes, jocks equals athletes on this side of the pond. I think you guys have a different meaning. It's possible. I was always raised with the understanding that a jock was an athlete. Is it different there? Gotta remember, I may sound like I'm not from the States all the time, but I am from here. And there are certain cultural components of Scots and Irish culture that I actually do not comprehend because I'm not from there. Oh, okay. So Scott is a jock in the UK. Dear God. Differentiations and linguistics, fascinating stuff for me. If you're interested in etymology in any way, shape, or form, that'll be Cyber Chad, the Chad status. Says Cortex, brother, awesome. Lucien says it's why you refer to athletes is due to the Scots. Jock is a common nickname for John. Scots are jocks. Okay, gotcha. Interesting. See, again, little lessons in etymology. I learn something new about wordplay all the time, and I enjoy it. I enjoy learning new things with regards to wordplay. Here we go. Make sure that this is cranked. Okay. Microphone keeps dipping down. All right. So, been almost going for close to 2 hours here. I'm going to start winding things down. Oh yeah, patties and mix. Yup, I've been called that many's the time over the years. Patrick and Michael, yes. So I'm going to start winding it down for the day, folks. Any parting questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, anything of the sort? Brother Cortex with jock, cocks, and socks. And, some of them, they put their cock in a sock, and then, anyway, how? But, Brother Cortex, I will say, you and I do have to have a conversation at some point soon to discuss what our next deep dive will be, because it's been a couple of months now, I think, roughly like a month and a half or 2 months. I do want to get back to doing a concentrated deep dive. I know we had wanted to do like one really hardcore actual deep dive, like every month or so. That was how we wanted to operate the framework for that going forward. I still do want to get to that. But we got to figure out what we're going to dive in on. Patty, dear Sarge. All right, dear Sarge asks, does Josh consider a paddy wagon derogatory or a badge of honor? In a weird way, it's a badge of honor. Because the term originates from Boston. And I hate Boston, but the reason it's referred to as a paddy wagon is because in early colonial America and in the 20th century, in early 20th century America, after the potato famine, when there was a flood deluge of Irish immigrants making their way to America, a ton of police officers and constables in the Boston area became known for being a little heavy-handed as law enforcement officers. And they would pretty much beat anyone being disorderly over the head and throw them in the back of the arrest wagon, or what was referred to at the time as the offender's wagon. But because there was such a heavy concentration of Irish Americans and Irishmen as cops in the Boston area during those years, it became colloquially referred to as the paddy wagon. So there is a part of me that's a little proud of, wow, my people were so concentrated in one area of work that their form of transportation became known as a paddy wagon, kind of directly associated with their culture and their nationality. But at the same time, it typically carried a really negative connotation because the officers who were driving those wagons were most often assumed to have beaten senseless and without cause any or heaviest justification anybody who got thrown in the back of that wagon. No, it was the head beaters. It was the truncheon wielding Irish coppers who comprised the vast majority of Boston's police force shortly after the immigration post-potato famine in Ireland. That's why the wagon was referred to as a paddy wagon, because it was driven and operated by a bunch of paddies who usually were heavy-handed pricks. And we're not talking about they always necessarily were arresting someone who deserved to be arrested. If you looked at a Boston cop wrong, they would stop the car or they would stop the wagon, whack you one over the head, and throw you in the back for disrespecting them. They were barely above organized criminals. You talk about police corruption or police brutality. Nobody had an inch over those old Boston Irish policemen. They were effectively a gang that was authorized to be a gang by the state authorities of Massachusetts at the time. It was years before the general public sentiment became, hey, this is fucking abusive. You got to get these guys to scale back on the beatings. So they eventually finally did. They finally had to clean things up in the Boston Police Department. But boy, howdy, it took a good 25, 30 years to clean up the behavior of the average Irish Boston policeman. A guinea pig. Sarge says, I got beat up by a cop from a pet shop. He was literally a guinea pig. I like that. So, anyhow, I am going to get going, folks. But I do want to stop you all thank you all for stopping in and for saying hello. Until you had a Tommy gun, then that changed up real quick. Yeah, Boston coppers were real hard cases until they had to go up against someone with a firearm. And then they would usually call in the cavalry. Then they would straighten up and fly fucking right. Or, more often than not, they would call in the feds. And I don't know if this is it's kind of a cultural demarcation point. At that time, a lot of Irish Americans, especially Irish immigrants to the States, culturally, they were by and large opposed to turning to a firearm when they could have fisticuffs with the person they had a disagreement or a conflict with. And that would be the way in which they tried to hash things out and settle things, was to not necessarily have to go to the very bottom of the barrel last ditch solution or last line solution. They wanted to handle things and work them out in a brawl. But when the other person in question brought out a blade or a blunt weapon, a baseball bat, or a firearm. At that time, Boston Irish cops had a tendency to withdraw and bring in or call in the cavalry or call in the feds because they didn't want to engage because that was not their forte. Quite frankly, their history, their behavioral cultural mechanisms and patterns of behavior did not really calculate for the introduction of a firearm to every scenario. But I don't know. It could have been a cultural thing. I'm not 100% certain. This Kim Said says free will is illusion. I know you were trying to say an illusion. Not sure what you're getting to there or why interject that kind of non sequitur, but all right. If you care to expound upon that or explain where that non sequitur comes from or why to inject that, be interested to see. Yeah, exactly, Lucien. You do walk away from a fist fight a lot easier than from a gunfight. Cortex says, not like it would have mattered by the time that gun went off. It was already too late. Yeah, and that's the thing is, you got to flee the field. You got to get the hell out of there and escape, hopefully intact, and then call in, the bigger, better equipped agency or team to come deal with a problem that you're just not equipped or prepared to deal with, either physically equipped with or mentally not prepared and equipped to deal with. But anyway, Brother Cortex, I will get together with you on Discord here in a little bit, hopefully, to talk over and discuss what we should do in terms of what subject or area we want to drill down into for the next deep dive. But anywho, if there's any last minute questions, comments, or concerns, I'm gonna grab one more smoke before calling it a wrap. Oh yeah, those big rounded drum magazines, brother. I remember. I've only ever really seen them in movies and video games. I've never actually seen an actual Tommy gun with drum magazine. I know there's been a number of shows like Mythbusters. Arlie Ermy had a show on History Channel at one point where he he like examined and demonstrated various military hardware and technology and law enforcement technology and equipment. Kim Said says, sorry, English is not my native language, but I think it's not real because of the chain of causality. Yeah, Sarge, that's good. I have heard that, well, not heard, I've read that term utilized to as a shorthand for a Tommy gun is a Chicago typewriter. Now, was that like a colloquial nickname for the weapon, or was that a type of Tommy gun? Or was it just called that because of the high crime in Chicago and among Chicago gangs? Okay, so it was a nickname. And Brother Cortex, at some point, I imagine you'll be able to tell me what exactly the differentiations were between the Tommy gun and the Thompson gun. because I have heard of the Thompson gun in reference to um, song lyrics actually from Dropkick Murphys, or not Dropkick Murphys, Floggin' Molly, referring in a song to the sound of a Thompson gun or the shells of a Thompson gun. The Thompson used both stick mags and drums. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Now on this Kim Saeed, you think that free will is not real because of the chain of causality. Dig down a little bit more into that, Saeed. Because that's more of a philosophical meandering and musing, and I'm interested in hearing or reading a little bit more about where that stems from or what prompted this line of thought. Because that is a subject area that I'm partially interested in discussing or diving down into, but this might be bad timing because I'm trying to wrap things up. I'm not trying to get roped into a lengthier cosmological conversation at the time. Because that is more of an in-depth conversation to have at length. No, Brother Cortex, I have not seen the trailer for 28 Years Later. I will have to check that out. Is the trailer up on YouTube? Oh, Sarge, I imagine it was quite costly. Probably a damned pretty penny. Because military grade hardware, even when it's legally allowed to be purchased or owned by a civilian, it's always been costlier. Okay, well, Kim, here's the question to bear in mind when it comes to everything in the universe. He says needs cause and effect to happen, even our choices. All right, I will check that out, Brother Cortex. Um, so yes, some stimuli, some event or circumstance is pressed into an individual's frame of existence and experiences. And based upon or predicated upon that set of circumstances, we then need to make a choice about what to do about that set of circumstances or that incident, that event in question. So something pushed that into our field of experience. Yes, but we have a choice in how to respond to that set of circumstances or those events. We have options. Now, the option that you choose to take in order to respond to or interact with a particular stimuli event is going to be predicated upon your capacities, your familiarity with the circumstances or situation, and your ability to properly comprehend and address the situation in question. You can attempt to do something based upon a nebulous kind of unknown set of circumstances. But when you're speaking about these things in generalistic terms, you're not giving it a proper frame of reference for people to actually approach or address what exactly it is you're talking about. Let's say, for instance, that you've got a car barreling down the road at you when you're riding your bike. You have a couple of options of how to respond to that stimuli. Now, you can try to say, well, you don't actually have the free will because that event is coming at you and it happens and you have to respond to it. You don't have a choice in that. Well, yes, you do. You have a choice in how you respond. You can choose to try and swerve out of the way. You can choose to go straight on and hope that they swerve. You can choose to throw on your brakes or try to just dump the bike and run off to the side of the road and avoid getting struck head on. You have options. Which of these options is going to work best or most efficiently for you? Well, that's a matter of determining your own physical speed and capacities and the speed and capacities of the operator and the vehicle coming at you. Now, yes, something else caused that vehicle to be coming barreling down the road at you, but you personally had no choice in that. However, you do have the choice in how to respond to that stimuli, to that event. How you respond to it is going to be dependent upon your own biases, your own expectations, your own capacities, your own previous framework historically of how you tend to operate physiologically and intellectually. Lucian says, as an aside, do you want me to send you some of the furry SCPs for you to do deep dives on? When you say furry, I hope you mean animals and not like actual creeps and degenerates. But that's not a problem, Lucian. Send along suggestions. We'll always consider things, but Brother Cortex and I will discuss soon what we're going to actually dive into for the next deep dives. SCP Foundation material is pretty broad, so we have a lot of material that we can choose from, thankfully. Kim Saeed says, no, there is no options. We have 3 cases. The first one is Laplace demon. The second one is atoms. It's just wave function in quantum theory. The third thing is we do not know. Either, says Lucian. I'm going to be frank with you, Saeed. You're delving into territory I'm not an expert in. And you're speaking with definitive authorities, so I would like to know, predicated upon what expertise or background are you presenting this assertion? Because you are diving into territory where I do not have a tremendous amount of background knowledge, only surface level understanding. And it currently feels like this is a tilted conversation that I am not qualified to engage in, quite frankly. Well, that's also a possibility, Brother Cortex. Is Kim Saeed might need to lay off the devil's lettuce. There is another possibility, and I'm just going to throw this out there. This individual, this Kim Saeed, could be potentially somebody who is just trolling for an attempted gotcha or one-upsmanship in terms of coming across as intellectually sophisticated and superior, diving into a conversational topic area that I am not expert in and have never claimed to be, and is inserting this non sequitur conversational or dialectic insert in an attempt to say, ha, I'm so much smarter than you. Fair enough, but what does it have to do with anything that we've been discussing here today? Nothing. Hence why I said that's a weird non sequitur to just throw out there. Or, and this is possible, they are actually interested in having a conversation with someone who they may have the impression has the intellectual capacity to fully comprehend these things, but I have to be honest and confess that no, I do not currently possess a deep enough understanding of the philosophical conversation or arena of material that he is diving into here. I have a basic understanding of concepts of quantum theory and quantum mechanics to try and have a surface level conversation about it, but not a deep enough understanding or applicable knowledge base to utilize in order to engage in full and fair good faith and try to hold any weight in a disagreement. Because the primary cause for me disagreeing and stating that there is such a thing as free will is because it is based and predicated upon my faith as a Christian man. It's not so much annoying, Saeed, as I just want to know what prompted you to bring this material up. What was your motivation in bringing this conversational tack to the show? I don't mind that you did. I'd like to know, though, why. What is your motivation here? Because if you're looking for a deeper philosophical conversation, that's fine, but I'm not necessarily going to be the best person to give you an actual good back and forth. Kind of an idiot. Hmm, that's troublesome. Okay. Okay. Ooh, Lucian, that's actually a good one. I do like the Mallow project. Well, that's not a problem, Saeed. It's again, it's more a matter of I'm not a big fan of non sequitur conjecture, but if I had more time, I might be willing to engage in that dialogue and that conversation a little bit more in depth. But I do have to get going because it's about time for me. Little one's been down for a nap for a little while. I haven't heard her stirring around yet, so I just want to poke my nose and make sure that she is either still napping or is just kind of chilling out and slowly coming to. I haven't heard anything up there from her room just yet, but I do have duties as a father to tend to first and foremost. So, folks, I want to thank you for tuning in this morning. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading. Thanks, Brooke.